Welcome, everybody, to the 25th Miami Jewish Film Festival, the world's largest festival of its kind. We want to thank all our members, sponsors, community partners, and all of you film lovers out there, and especially our presenting sponsors, the Center for the Advancement of Jewish Education and the Greater Miami Jewish Federation, for their continued support throughout all of these years. My name is Rabbi Fred Klein, and I'm the director of Mishkan Miami, the Jewish Connection for Spiritual Support at the Greater Miami Jewish Federation. Mishkan Miami is our community's chaplaincy initiative. I'm excited today to be moderating a virtual conversation with the team who created what I think all of you agree is really just a very powerful and unique film. We are joined today by Nancy Otto, Chazz's wife and co-producer, who opened a very difficult chapter in her life in the hopes that her journey would help other human beings. However, Prognosis is the product of a circle of friends and filmmakers that promised Chazz that this film would see the day of light, and indeed it has. And I hope enlarges our own humanity as well. It is clear for all of these individuals that are joining us today, this film was an act of love. Thus, for those making the film, they were not simply filming it, but living the journey of Chazz and Nancy. I'd like to introduce our other three co-producers, Joan Lefkowitz, a dear friend of the family and a collaborator for decades. Joan is also the co-chair of the board of directors for GroundSpark, the nonprofit documentary film company that Chazz ran for many, many years. Lidia Szajko is a distinguished documentary filmmaker in her own right and did much of the camera work. She served on the board of GroundSpark and until recently was the chair of the cinema department at the City College of San Francisco. Kate Stilley Steiner was involved in a lot of the post-production and was a longtime collaborator with Chazz. She is co-founder of a documentary film nonprofit called Citizens Films that co-produced the film with GroundSpark. And finally, we have today Andra Oshinsky, the impact producer. Andra worked with Chazz distributing GroundSpark films for several years before her death. She was not involved in the filmmaking side of the project, but she is heading up the outreach and public engagement work of this important film. And she has had a leadership role in creating a community conversation guide for the Jewish community. Andra herself is Jewish and has a deep understanding of how this film can be used in the Jewish community. Our Greater Miami Jewish Federation, through Mishkan Miami, runs a program called Sacred Jewish Conversation that can help you have these conversations with your friends, partners, loved ones, family members. And we also train facilitators. And we will be glad to screen this with you or a group of friends if you are interested. So you can contact me at the Greater Miami Jewish Federation to work with us to promote this such important issue within our society. Thank you today for joining us in this interesting conversation about the film Prognosis. Our conversation today is in memory of Debra Chasnoff's Dvorah. So we're going to start with the decision to make such a challenging film. What made you decide to create a film out of a diagnosis of cancer? What were your motivations? And what were the expectations of creating such a film? So tell us a little bit about how the film came together.
I'll start with that. Thank you so much, Rabbi Klein. Chazz, as we all knew her, she made that decision pretty much upon being diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And, the camera was her friend, and she wanted all of us to help her create this film. And she specifically wanted Kate to be the director of the film with her. And throughout that process, she and Kate would meet to try to figure out, what is this film? So that was a decision that Chazz made, and upon her death, when she asked all of us to please help complete it, and upon her death, there was no question that we would continue and make this film for her.
So when Chazz came to you, Nancy, and said, I want to make a film about this, What were your feelings as the partner, as the
Dread.
spouse?
It was dread. Nobody wanted to be on, I mean, your most vulnerable, gut-wrenching moments. You don't want that to be documented. But over time, um, I'm super grateful that Chazz did that. It's different reasons, but for me, it's a wonderful record of what happened, first of all, and it became sort of our witness um, through all the ups and downs that, I probably wouldn't be remembering so well now were it not for the film. And to help, I hope it really helps others who are on similar journeys, just to see that you're not alone. It is very easy to feel so isolated on that journey.
Hmm. I think one of the things that struck me, and looking at a little bit of Chazz's history, is that she dealt with topics that were provocative and in some circles might be seen as taboo. She was an award-winning documentarian that wrote about and produced films on, for example, same-sex families, same-sex couples that adopt children and build families together, and same-sex parenting. Do you see, like, in terms of her wanting to tackle such a taboo subject as end-of-life care, do you see like threads of connection in terms of who she was as a human being?
Does anybody else want to answer that? I might definitely. Oh, okay. I would say it's a little differently. I see it a slightly differently how she thought about these things. She lived her life as a lesbian mom, and she saw what was happening for her children and how they were probably going to be bullied because of her family. And she wanted to create films that really open people's hearts instead of just being very critical or judgmental. She really wanted people to kind of enter into thinking about other people's lives differently. And I think this film is similar. I think there's a lot of fear and aversion to talking about our mortality. And I think she hoped that this film would enter through our hearts so that we're not so much in our mind in a fear area, but more in our heart in a love area, to see how to stay tender and soft in our hearts as we think about immortality.
Thank you for sharing that. What strikes me is also the amount of vulnerability that is revealed in this film, and therefore opening up to all of us the idea that that life has vulnerable moments, and we can share this together through the power of love, and we can get through these very difficult times together. And so in her vulnerability, I think the putting together of such a film was such a courageous act of bravery. So Kate, you were really the one that was really in charge of like the filming, and even if Chazz was directing at different points, I'm sure that she wasn't able to take the creative charge at every moment. As a film crew, as the prognosis became more and more clear over the course of a year, did the team ever think about ending the production of the film? Feeling that the illness became this creating of this film became a distraction, and that they really wanted to focus inwardly at this point. How did you negotiate that at each turn, at each change of the prognosis?
Well, let me just say first off that I really did not, I was not in a leadership role in the the filming of the documentary so much as Chazz and Nancy and really Lidia and Joan did the majority of the filming. So it wasn't until we got into the editorial process that I took more of a leadership role. But I do think that I guess somebody else should speak to that idea of, did we ever think about stopping filming? Because you folks, you probably have a better perspective on that. But I do think that the one thing I will say is that I feel like Chazz kept she needed to make a film because she was a filmmaker. And that's the way that she understood how to be in the world in a way. And I think that's one of the reasons, that's an additional reason why she wanted to make the film. It was the way that she understood how to actually negotiate the world.
I'll address the part about, did we ever think of stopping? I'm interested to hear what the rest of you think, but I don't think we ever really considered stopping. Is that what the rest of you think too?
Well, I feel like throughout it was really Chazz and Nancy who were leading us, and Chazz was fully committed to doing this throughout. I think there was, in my recollection, one interesting moment when we considered stopping, which was after Chazz passed, and we were thinking about what the film could be, because Chazz had never completely settled on a framework or a narrative for the film. And there was a moment when the group was together thinking about all the different ways the film could be structured and designed, where we actually thought, well, maybe the film is actually done, that the process of filming it fulfilled the needs and the requirements of the film. So in a way, for me, that was kind of a moment of birth for the film, because it was born again once we decided that there's absolutely a really beautiful and important thing that can be made here.
I just want to pick up on that because I also realize that the film ends rather abruptly, in the sense that we see her death, and then there's no description of the aftermath or the grieving process. What was the editorial decision to end the story at that point in the production? Maybe you can explore that a little bit more.
Well, I can say I'm sorry, I can just say quickly that our hope was that people, after watching this film, would think about their own lives. And we felt that if we did an epilogue about Nancy and Chazz's life and the aftermath, that it would distract from that opportunity. But the power of the way that the film ends is really about the cinematography. So I think it'd be great for one of the filmers to talk about how those last events got filmed.
Well, I also, this is a good time to bring up our process. I do feel that Kate largely led us through some difficult moments and some creative moments. But the remarkable thing about this process was that it was fully collaborative, beginning to end, which is, as you know, Rabbi, get 5, 6 people in a room. It's not easy to make a decision. And there were a lot of tough decisions to make. And we really held each other, and we held Chazz's, what we thought Chazz might want through that process. And I think we're pretty happy with what came out, but it wasn't always easy, especially watching all the footage of someone who you were deeply grieving in that moment and watching it over and over again. We had 200 hours of footage that we had to watch, and that's something.
In terms of like the difficulty in terms of watching this, you made the decision at the very end of the film to actually show her immediately after she died. And you held that image for a while. How did that decision come up, and why did you decide to make that kind of decision?
Well, I can speak to the editorial side of that. We felt that it was very important that the film itself was inviting viewers to really look at the process of end of life. and experience it, so that when they move in that direction in their own personal lives, they would have some sort of a feeling of, oh yes, I've seen this before, which we hoped would give them a sense of having a little less fear of the end of life for them or for their loved ones, or, you know, just in general thinking about it. So, you know, when we had 200 hours of footage to look at, we whittled it down to, you know, what were the most powerful moments. And we ended up with 12 hours of really powerful moments. And of all of them, that one shot was so striking. It was such, it was just so powerful that none of us even ever considered that we wouldn't show it. I think we did talk about like, well, will this be off-putting? But at every point, I never felt like, you know, that it was a question. We all, I feel like, knew that it had to happen. And I think it really speaks to the bravery of the people who filmed that last scene, that they were willing to take that image and to make sure that the shot really was that long. Like that's the hallmark of a real filmmaker that's willing to do that.
I think that we live, you know, so often in a culture in which death is seen as something that happens over there. Right? And that final scene, to have everybody present, friends and family, everyone present and embracing her as she transitions, I felt like was such a meaningful moment. And in some ways, it normalizes it. It's always a crisis, but it normalizes it in a certain way, like this is what it means to be a human being. And I think the more that we can accept that together, the more that we can navigate all the different challenges that we have throughout our lives. One of the things I thought was interesting is the conversations that you had. Nancy, did you want to add something? I saw that you were.
I did, just really quickly. I actually was very worried about that shot, mainly because of the boys and her father. I was worried how they would be affected by it. And we did a early screening with Oscar and Noah to get, once we had a fuller a film. And we were very tentative about those ending scenes. We had very little of it in. And Oscar, who's a theater major, or an actor, he really felt like, look, you've spent this whole time trying to avoid this happening, and it happens. And, you know, why wouldn't you spend more time there? And it was beautiful. It really gave permission for us, I think, to go full on and to really enter into that space, and not worry about those closest to her being harmed by that.
Wow. That says so much about Oscar. One of the things that I thought was interesting is you were able to bring the physician on board into this documentary and into the inner room. And when she was conveying various news at different stages of the diagnosis, how much information did you believe is useful for a physician to deliver to a patient that's going through this? And did you feel that you received from the medical staff the support that you needed on this journey? What was done in the most ideal way, and what areas do you feel that could have been addressed in a different way?
Well, first of all, I want to say we loved all our doctors. Really, they spent an inordinate amount of times and effort trying to help Chazz live as long as she could. And it was incredibly vulnerable and generous of them to allow us to film. I mean, really, that was such a gift. And I would say, you know, it's all so personal. Every person's going to have a different need from a doctor. And sometimes it's not even about what the doctor says, it's more the work we have to do with ourselves, to get more comfortable with what is being presented to us. But I do hope that this film helps doctors, though, because I think a lot of times doctors are told, you did this wrong, you should have done that way, you didn't, you pushed the medication too long or whatever. And I feel like, you know, they're trying to figure that out. What is the right path? How much to say? And it's all in their head. And I'm hoping from a more, if this film is able to touch them in their heart more, that they see more and feel it from here, they will be better guided about for each patient how to give information, essentially hard information.
There's a scene I know that when she actually uses the words end of life, you're approaching the end of life. And was that how did you experience that, or all of you? How did you experience that at that moment when that word was put into the room?
I can't remember who filmed that scene with Hope. Was that you, Kate? Okay. I mean, for me, I was nervous about it because I was coming from a place of let's see what happens instead of predicting and saying it's this and that. And now that sets off a whole set of thinking, like just you're alive right now. And I kind of wanted to always have that, that not get too far ahead. You know, we all have end of life, you know, but anyways, but that's how what I was struggling with.
So in terms of being a caregiver, sometimes it shows both of you are in the same emotional place, but sometimes you go off to different emotional spaces. And it's very hard for you or her to connect because you may be at different levels of processing what's going on. What would you advise people who are caregiving for those with, and this is for everybody here because you all took this journey, but for those of you that are journeying with someone who's dealing with a serious or terminal illness, what would you tell them? What advice could you give them?
I'll start, but I'll be short. I feel like for me, and again, it's all unique, and every person is different. I felt like I don't know how much time I have with Chazz. I am going to savor every moment, and I'm not going to be tripping about what this means for my life so much, you know, in terms of, oh, I can't do this now or something. It's like I am blessed to be able to walk this journey with her for as long as I can walk it, and just grateful for every moment I can have with her, no matter how hard it is. So that's how I helped it, and it helped me.
Mm-hmm. Would anyone else like to chime in here? Because you were all there present for this entire journey together. Okay, well, one of the things that I think that was really significant in the film was the role of faith. At different points, especially, with your Buddhist faith and how that helped. And how did you, so basically, how was your faith a major, source of support during this period of your life, and ritual also?
Rabbi Klein, I think Joan was going to try to answer that last question.
Sure. Oh, Joan, I'm sorry.
No problem.
One of the challenges when you're interviewing 5 people.
Yes, absolutely. No, you're doing a great job. Thank you. And this actually, my answer kind of addresses your recent question as well, which is, I think all of us have seen a number of people die. And I've been pretty much up this close with several other people besides Chazz. And the major difference being they didn't get filmed. So the memories are all here and here. They're not there for other people to see. But for me, what's remarkable is how differently every person experiences her own death, and the whole process of passing. It's such a personal experience, and reminds me a lot of how differently each person experiences birth. and that you can't predict before you get there how you're going to do it or what you're going to feel or what you'll need. It's a very in the moment experience. And you don't know when you're going to say, God help me, or when you're going to say, pick up the phone and call a friend. You have no idea which moments will be filled by faith and which moments will be filled by friends and which moments will be filled by a bowl of ice cream. So that kind of answers the question for me anyway.
How was Chazz's Jewish faith instrumental in this journey? We saw at the very end, Jewish prayers were being recited at her deathbed. What did her Jewish faith mean for her? And how did that help her at different points in this journey?
Well, so Chazz and I were together for 18 years. And so I don't know her whole life history other than what she's told me. But my experience of Chazz is that as time went on, before she was even diagnosed, she was turning more and more to her Jewish faith and the Buddhist practices, which, she described herself as a Jubu, which, some people call themselves. But I think, she was very much, I think, feeling, especially after she was diagnosed, that these practices are a comfort to her, and they provide steadiness, and they provide a support to the soul. And I think it was really, really important to her that her cousin Stacy, who's a rabbi, was, I think, is important that. I don't know if she was conscious at that point that Rabbi Stacy was there, but I'd like to think that she knew that she was there, and I think that probably meant a lot to her, how much Rabbi Stacy was able to be with her at the end. And just, that Buddhist piece that you were kind of referring to, that it is, it's incredibly important in terms of feeling like there's something bigger, in the world. There's something bigger that's beyond comprehension in many ways. And there's something, it's very telling that for thousands of years, people have felt this and formed religions to try to help understand it and talk about it. So I think, I found it incredibly supportive to have a practice, a Buddhist practice that helped ground me in the experience and not to spin out too much during the experience.
In some ways, like ritual and religion can hold those things that can be chaotic, because death is always a chaotic experience. Even in the Jewish tradition, when a person passes away, the first step is called a ninut, where the person is getting ready for the burial. And very often there's an idea that a person who's involved in the burial preparations is not obligated in doing positive bound commandments. So they don't need to pray at the moment they're getting ready for burial. Now, on a technical level, that has to do with the idea that we have to be involved in the mitzvah of burying a person. But on an emotional level, it's because at this moment, life feels chaotic. Until we try to figure out what this means in our life, at that moment, life can feel chaotic. And mitzvah, the idea of commandment, is positive agency actions that seem meaningful. And so even in the Jewish tradition, there's sort of an affirmation that life at times can feel chaotic, but faith gives us a sense of groundedness, a form and one of the things that I forget the name of the ritual, but that movement, right, and holding, like I almost felt like all of the chaos was being held in between these two hands. That we can hold ourselves in this space, and I found that brilliant. Like that using it, processing things not just through our minds, but through our bodies. And that's one of the most powerful things about ritual in our lives. In the Jewish tradition, we also say that, that Rabbi Abraham Torsky, I remember, had a really pithy thing, and maybe other rabbis or other teachers taught the same idea. It's not that we are bodies that have a soul, but we are souls in this world that inherit in a body for a short amount of time. Pointing to the idea that we are all linked to something larger than ourselves, whatever we want to call that. And I think during these times of transition, those kind of spiritual beliefs from different traditions can really help us bond ourselves to those ultimate things that we know deep inside at times, but in the cacophony of life, we can forget. And so I really appreciated how the film incorporated faith, different forms of faith into the tapestry of this process, along with this process of chaos, understanding that there are these eternal values, however you imagine them, that help us navigate this abyss in certain ways. In terms of getting to the end of our conversation, and I'd like to kind of move to Andra to speak a little bit. You've been working on a curriculum for this film. It's definitely a provocative film that raises so many questions. We're having a conversation here, but each of you in your homes, I'm sure as soon as you turn off this video, you're going to turn to the people that you watch this film with and start talking to them. How does this relate to you in your life right now? Because it's not just about Chazz and Chazz's life, it's about our lives. That's why I think that this is an act of generosity to share such a film with others. So, Andra, what are your hopes for this film?
So, my hope for this film is that it can help people have really important conversations. And actually, for me, working for Chazz, for Groundspark, I feel like that was a huge part of the drive I saw from her filmmaking, from her nonprofit leadership, was to never shy away from a difficult conversation. And I hope this film can be what I need for myself and in my own family, where this is really hard stuff to talk about. And I know that I lost a very close member of my own family to metastatic brain cancer. And I really struggled to have these kind of conversations with her and with my other family members. So I hope this will create space for people to do that. I hope that the discussion guide that we're developing will allow communities who want to start to get into conversation about end-of-life issues, that it will support them in having those conversations. And if those are Jewish communities, we have a specific Jewish section of our discussion guide to let people really get into the rich tradition and ritual that Judaism offers us to navigate all of this. And I really hope, and I'd love to let the film team also talk about their hopes for the film and the impact in the discussion guide. But for me, I hope that this film shows people this isn't like the model. We're not saying this is the best way to walk the path of serious illness and end of life. This is the perfect death or anything along those lines. We're saying this is a way, and this is an intimate look that not all of us have. And so I hope that it will show people that you can navigate this journey with courage and with choice and with community. And you can have the courage to face the present moment and really be in that each step of the way, which is something that we often saw in the film. We saw a lot of courage to face present moments and all of the difficulty and beauty that came with it. And that you can have a lot of choice. You can choose to hear your prognosis or not hear your prognosis. You can choose the kinds of treatments and the kind of thinking that you want to carry in your journey. And then very much you get to choose the community that you want to walk this journey with. And it can go beyond the nuclear family, and that's something that we can all be thinking about now. What kind of community do we want to build and foster and carry with us from this very moment that we're alive all the way through to our last breath. So those are a couple of my hopes.
So, Andra, I just want to pick up on one point because I think it's so important for our listeners to focus on that. We live in a society that really values our autonomy and our choice. Basically, we are people of agency. But so often as we approach the end of our lives, decisions are made for us and we lose that sense of agency. So I think if we want to live in accordance with our values, it's important to really have those conversations with those around us saying, this is what I want, this is my life, this is how I choose to lead my life. And for people to respect those choices. And so I think that, these are really difficult, but such important conversations and life affirming. Anyone else want to share some of their hopes for the film? Now, I know that there's some people, I know you have a lot of hopes in this film. So.
While people are thinking, I'm just going to add that I think that part about being able to talk to people in advance about what we want for our own end of life, for the active dying part of that journey where we aren't necessarily able to communicate. I think that's so important, and it's a really hard series of conversations to have. And so I do hope that a film like this will just help people take that first step, just starting to ask, even just myself first, well, what do I want? And start to figure out, how do we ask our loved ones that, or how do we articulate that? What am I afraid of? And what are my core values? What is most important to me? And I do think that's vitally important. And, being the impact producer for this film, I have, lofty hopes and dreams, but I'm also a person with a family who has lost very close people in my life. And I know what it's like to have not had those conversations. And there's a weight to that, to not having asked a loved one, what do you want? What don't you want? And getting into that. And so I hope that this film can be a gift in that way and let people start to be able to just slowly move into that. It's a challenge for our whole lives to try to have that kind of difficult conversation.
Nancy.
I'm really heartened that we're also starting to have different organizations that work in the death and dying movement want to use the film with their membership and try to use it in training. INELDA is one of our partners, the International Death Doula Association, and they're training a large cohort of new death doulas, and they're wanting to use the film for that purpose as part of their training program. And that's fantastic. I hope that will happen with hospice and other areas like palliative care areas as well.
And I think we're, especially after COVID right now, I think we're reaching a sea change where people are much more open to talking about issues of mortality. And we've had programs throughout the country of Death Cafe, Death Over Dinner. In New York City, the arts community created something called Reimagine. In the arts community, where we really confront these issues of mortality. But I want to conclude on what I would say is a very positive note, because I think that the story, you can frame this film on one way as an end-of-life journey, but I also think it's a life journey. There's a lot of stuff in this film that talks about affirming life at every stage. The life can be powerful. As long as you are here, you are living life at every stage, like the bike trip or the birthday party. All of those are moments in time of real joy, and maybe even heightened joy. So as directors, obviously you had all, many, many hours of material to share, but you chose these moments. And by making that editorial decision, what did you want to tell the viewer, in a sense, about this journey in life?
Well, I'll say just one thing about that. I feel like there's a scene at the very, very end of the film where Chazz is already in a hospital bed in the living room, and Joan and Nancy and Joan's partner Stacy, they sing a song. They just break into song at this like totally random moment. It almost, it just bursts into life, that moment. And I think that we included moments like that in the film so that you would see that, you know, these moments of living life, they might be micro moments. You might not even recognize them when they happen, but they give a sense of joyfulness and participation in your own lived life that we hope that this film really gives people a vision for, so that when they're in this journey, that they're looking for those moments.
So I think that's a beautiful place to end. And I'll just end with a small reflection. Many of you might know that every morning there's a prayer that we say in the Jewish prayers. Modeh ani levanecha. I thank you, God, Melech Elchai v'Kayam, everlasting God, shechazarta bin mishpati bechemla rabba emunatecha, which means that you have returned your soul to me with in mercy. Great is my gratitude, or great is my faith. And one of the things I think about is that the idea here is that every night that we go to sleep, the rabbis ask us to imagine ourselves as a symbolic death. And every day that we wake up is sort of a wonder that we are returned to consciousness. We are returned to this world in a sense. And that every day we occupy space in this world, and we are called in a sense to live life powerfully where we are at that moment, at every point of life. And it's clear to me, and this is something that speaks volumes about who Chazz was, is that her life may have physically been diminished as she approached her death, but her spirit actually was enlarged. Thinking about how she created life at the very end as well, and really asks us to think about our own lives every day, is such a gift. And so I thank everybody here for talking about a sensitive topic, but hopefully that we feel challenged, we feel inspired by her example, and we feel uplifted, and that we live life more powerfully and we love more powerfully for those around us. So thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you. Toda rabah.